Imagine tonight, before you close your eyes, you speak only 7 words. Just 7. Not a long prayer, not an ancient mystical formula, not a dramatic script designed to impress the heavens. A simple sentence, a short breath of truth spoken consciously, with presence, with sincerity. A sentence that has the quiet power to redirect the course of your unconscious, and with it the tone, quality, and fate of your days. Carl Gustav Jung once said that a mind which falls asleep in peace creates a reality more aligned with the soul. Yet most people do not fall asleep in peace. They fall asleep in pieces, carrying the heavy armor of unresolved thoughts, silent fears, unspoken regrets, quiet disappointments, remembered arguments, and futures imagined in anxiety instead of trust. They close their eyes, but the mind does not rest. It continues fighting wars that were never won in daylight. What Jung discovered, and what most humans today have forgotten, is that the unconscious never sleeps. It works while the body rests. It listens while the conscious mind fades. It continues shaping, processing, organizing, and creating even while the world outside slips into silence. And if the final message it receives before sleep is destructive, the unconscious dreams in destruction. It builds inner worlds out of worry. It constructs emotional realities out of fear. It repeats internal narratives of failure and abandonment because those were the last impressions left upon it. And yet there is an antidote, a simple symbolic code. 7 words. The power of these words is not in language itself, not in magic or technique, but in the gesture, the deliberate, offering you hand over to your unconscious in the most vulnerable moment of the day. Jung called this a liminal imprint, something that crosses the fragile boundary between consciousness and sleep, planting itself like a seed in the fertile soil of the psyche. Most people do not realize that the minutes before sleep decide the emotional climate of the night. They feed their minds with anger, regret, and self-protection. And then they wonder why they wake exhausted, why they dream of loss, why sleep feels like battle instead of refuge. But if you speak 7 words with intention, with presence, with complete sincerity, the unconscious begins to listen. Not because you have spoken an incantation, but because you have opened a door. Sleep becomes not an escape, but a returning, a homecoming, a surrender, a release into something deeper and wiser than the conscious mind can ever construct while awake. This is why the 7 words matter, because they transform the inner atmosphere. They rearrange the symbolic architecture. They change the emotional direction in which the psyche travels through the night. And through that change, they shift the shape of the world you wake into. So before going further, breathe, slow down. Let your shoulders drop, let your chest soften, let your breath deepen. This is not just information. It is an invitation, a quiet initiation into a forgotten truth, a reminder that you hold more power over your inner world than you have ever been taught. Even in something as ordinary as falling asleep, you hold the ability to transform everything from the inside out. The moment you close your eyes may appear insignificant, but to the unconscious it is sacred. It is ritual. It is the threshold between 2 worlds, the world of matter and the world of symbol, the world of reason and the world of soul. When you lie down, turn off the lights, and let the body fall into stillness, something ancient awakens. You step away from the noise of daylight and into the quiet chambers of the inner temple. Jung said that at the very second consciousness withdraws, the unconscious begins to work with the material left at the surface. It invents nothing from nothing. It builds from what you give it. If you fall asleep in anger, the unconscious fortifies defenses. If you fall asleep in fear, it activates escape. If you fall asleep in guilt, it reinforces inner judgment. But if you fall asleep in acceptance, in surrender, in gratitude, a different architecture emerges. It begins to restructure, reorganize, open. Healing begins where resistance ends. Sleep is not absence. It is transformation. It is dialogue. It is a conversation between the conscious self and the deeper unknown self, the self you rarely meet while distracted by the noise of the day. Jung believed that dreams are messages, symbolic conversations between the outer self and the inner soul, and that if we speak to the unconscious before sleep, it will answer, not through language but through imagery. Insight, release, clarity, and the quiet dissolving of pain. This is why the 7 words matter, not because they change the external universe, but because they alter the internal one. The unconscious responds to symbols, not arguments, to sincerity, not performance, to openness, not control. When you speak 7 words with presence, you are saying, I am ready. Ready to surrender control, ready to enter the night without armor, ready to trust the deeper intelligence within. The ego resists change. It clings to what is familiar, even when painful. It is wired to protect, to control, to repeat, and every night, just before sleep, there is a brief opening, a window in which the ego loosens its grip and the deeper self steps forward. That moment is the key. That is when the seed can be planted. Many ancient traditions speak of words before sleep as gateways, not superstition, psychology. The 7 words are not meant to command the universe. They are meant to signal readiness to the unconscious. A declaration, I am no longer fighting myself. I am ready to rest without fear. I allow healing to begin in silence. When spoken for 3 nights with sincerity, something shifts. Not outside at first, but within. Dreams soften, thoughts loosen, sleep deepens. The nervous system unwinds. The body stops bracing. The heart stops defending. The soul steps forward. There is a kind of peace that is not fought for but received. It arrives not through force, but through surrender, through willingness, through a whispered sentence spoken with reverence in the darkness. 7 words. That is enough. Because the unconscious does not need paragraphs. It needs truth. A single honest breath. A symbolic gesture. Something real. And maybe you are only 1 sentence away from remembering who you are and how deeply you deserve rest. If you close your eyes tonight with intention, something extraordinary begins, even if it feels subtle, even if nothing dramatic happens outwardly. The unconscious does not measure transformation by spectacle. It measures it by sincerity. It listens for the moment the inner war stops, even briefly. It waits for the signal that the self is no longer in opposition with itself. And those 7 words spoken softly become that signal. The permission for the deeper work to begin. Most people go to sleep with their minds still racing, trying to solve the unsolvable, replaying old conversations, defending themselves against memories that cannot attack them anymore, negotiating with fears that exist only in imagination. They carry the past into the night and drag their bodies into battle against ghosts. And then they wonder why rest never arrives. Why waking up feels like pulling a stone from the bottom of a river. Why another day begins already heavy. The truth is that the unconscious absorbs everything unresolved. It keeps shaping what you refuse to release. It keeps holding what you do not lay down. The body lies in bed, but the psyche keeps fighting. That is why the final words, before sleep, determine the quality of the night and the tone of the morning. It is the last imprint that the unconscious receives before taking over. It becomes the blueprint. Jung believed that the psyche is always moving toward wholeness, always trying to heal what is divided, always trying to reconcile what is split. But it cannot do that when the conscious mind is screaming instructions driven by fear, judgment, or regret. Healing cannot enter a locked room. Peace cannot reach a clenched fist. The unconscious needs openness, softness, permission. It needs a small crack through which light can enter. The 7 words are that crack. They are the opening, the surrender, the letting down of defenses. When you say them, you are not demanding change. You are not forcing silence. You are not telling the unconscious what to do. You are giving it space to move, space to reorder, space to rebuild. And that space is everything. Because inside every human being there is a deeper intelligence, older than thought, wiser than logic, untouched by fear. A part of you that knows the way without knowing how. A part that never lost connection with meaning. A part that remembers when the mind forgets. The ancient interior compass that guides without speaking. The soul. When the ego falls asleep and the soul steps forward, transformation begins. Not in fireworks and quiet. In the rearranging of what you feel without understanding why. In the dissolving of a tension that has lived inside you for years. In the sudden softening of a memory that once burned. The unconscious does not repair through force. It repairs through reorganization. It takes the broken pieces and places them differently until they no longer cut. Every night you fall asleep, you are crossing a threshold between worlds. And the words you speak at that doorway determine what follows you into the dark. If you carry fear, fear becomes architecture. If you carry trust, trust becomes the foundation. People underestimate subtle change because they expect transformation to roar. But the truth is that almost everything that heals you happens quietly. Breath by breath, thought by thought, night by night. You notice it not in dramatic waves, but in the gentle way your mornings begin differently. In the way you stop waking with dread. In the way your first thought no longer hurts. In the way the world seems softer, not because it changed, but because you did. When you speak those 7 words with sincerity, the unconscious hears, I am ready to stop fighting myself. And that readiness is the most powerful force in psychological evolution. Because the moment resistance ends, everything that has been waiting begins. Dreams shift first. They become symbols rather than battles. Emotions rise not to drown you, but to show you what was unfinished. Thoughts that once attacked soften and drift like passing clouds. And slowly, without struggle, the nervous system unwinds. The body stops guarding. Muscles release. Breathing deepens. The heart stops bracing for imaginary waves. This is the beginning of inner peace. Not the absence of challenge, but the presence of trust. The discovery that you no longer need to grip everything with white knuckles. You no longer need to win against yourself to survive. You no longer need to mentally rehearse disaster as if suffering prepares you for safety. The unconscious responds to surrender, not control. It responds to truth, not perfection. It responds to humility, not performance. There is something sacred in speaking to yourself gently in the dark. Something innocent, something ancient, something easily forgotten in the noise of the world. In that moment, you become both the healer and the healed, both the listener and the voice, both the seeker and the answer. You stop abandoning yourself. And that is where the shift begins. Jung believed that most human suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from inner separation and the split between what the soul needs and what the ego insists upon. But when you speak with intention before sleep, you bring those fragments back together. You say, I hear you, I am here. And the unconscious, which has waded through storms of silence, finally relaxes. It begins to work with you instead of against you. And then something extraordinary occurs. The world around you begins to respond differently. Relationships that once triggered pain now feel lighter. The things that once overwhelmed you lose their power. You stop interpreting everything through the filter of fear. You stop expecting catastrophe. You stop waking already tired. You begin to feel rooted, grounded, centered. You walk through the world without needing to rush, defend, apologize, or prove. You carry peace within you instead of searching for it outside. You become quieter inside, but stronger in presence. Others do not know what changed, but they feel it. You feel it, because transformation does not need to announce itself. It reveals itself through the way you live, and it all begins with the moment before sleep. The moment the outer world fades and the inner world opens its door. 7 words, 1 breath, a surrender, a beginning. Inside that beginning is a new life waiting to unfold. A life where you meet yourself instead of escaping yourself. A life in which rest becomes restoration rather than temporary numbness. A life shaped not by fear but by awareness. Close your eyes tonight and speak. The unconscious is already listening. Something remarkable happens when the unconscious begins to feel safe again. It begins to reveal what has long been hidden beneath layers of noise, defense and survival. It begins to speak. Not in sentences, not in explanations, but in symbols. In dreams that carry meaning rather than chaos. In images that rise softly to the surface like forgotten messages. In quiet intuitions that guide without demanding attention. When the inner space is no longer filled with conflict, the deeper mind finally has room to breathe. Most people go through life disconnected from this inner wisdom because they never enter sleep consciously. They collapse into the night like soldiers after battle, dragging exhaustion into their beds, surrendering to unconsciousness out of defeat instead of intention. But when the night becomes ritual instead of escape, something shifts. The psyche begins to open. It begins to reorganize the architecture of your inner world. Jung believed that dreams are the language of the soul, the bridge between the unconscious and the waking self. They are not random noise or meaningless illusions. They are messages. They are mirrors. They are guides showing what the conscious mind refuses to see in daylight. When you fall asleep with intention, those messages become clearer. They stop shouting through nightmares and begin to whisper through symbols. Night becomes conversation instead of conflict. And soon, without forcing anything, the unconscious begins to release what no longer belongs. Old memories rise not to hurt you, but to leave. Emotions surface not to overwhelm you, but to complete themselves. Thoughts that once trapped you now pass through without attaching. The body unravels its armor, layer by layer. You begin to feel lighter without knowing why. There comes a morning when you open your eyes and you realize something subtle but undeniable has changed. The heaviness is gone. The fear is quieter. The world feels less sharp. The air feels different. You breathe differently. Instead of waking into tension, you wake into stillness. And this is the work of the unconscious responding to the call of peace. At first you may think it is coincidence. A good night, a lucky morning, but then you notice it again. And again. You stop bracing for pain the moment you wake. You do not prepare for the world as if it were enemy territory. You allow yourself to exist without defense. And for the first time in a long time, you feel the soft presence of yourself. This is what happens when the unconscious finally realizes that the war is over. People think transformation must come from effort and control, from discipline, from declarations, from dramatic decisions. But the deepest transformations come through surrender, through letting go, through quiet gestures that align the inner world rather than forcing the outer world into submission. 7 simple words spoken before sleep are not powerful because they command something. They are powerful because they allow something. They allow the healing that has been waiting for years to begin. The unconscious does not resist change when it feels safe. It resists because it is trying to protect you from more pain. When you fall asleep in fear, the psyche believes danger is still present. It keeps fighting. It keeps defending. It keeps bracing. But when you speak with sincerity, I accept, I trust, I let go. I thank you. Good night. You are telling the unconscious, it is safe to rest. It is safe to release. It is safe to stop carrying everything alone. And when it believes you, it begins to reorganize your inner world the way the body heals a wound. Silently, patiently, precisely. First, your emotional patterns begin to shift. You notice you no longer react from instinctive pain. You respond instead of exploding. You breathe before speaking. You listen before defending. You wait before assuming. Something inside you holds steady, even when the outer world does not. You stop breaking every time something goes wrong. You stop sinking when others disappoint you. You stop collapsing into yourself when life becomes heavy. Then your relationships begin to transform. You attract people who can meet you where you are. You release attachments rooted in fear. You stop trying to fix what was never aligned. You allow distance where it is necessary and closeness where it is safe. You begin to recognize who drains you and who nourishes you. And you choose differently, not out of rebellion, but out of alignment. And then your path begins to change. Not through sudden miracles, but through synchronicities, the subtle signs Jung believed were the language of the universe. A message arrives at the exact moment you needed clarity. A stranger speaks a sentence that feels like it was meant for you. An opportunity you did not chase appears. A problem that felt impossible dissolves. A door opens in a direction you had not even considered. And you realize you did not force any of it. You allowed it. It is not magic. It is resonance. When the inner world shifts, the outer world rearranges to match it. Life becomes a mirror instead of a battlefield. One night you may dream something strangely unfamiliar but deeply meaningful. An image that stays with you throughout the day, a symbol that continues to echo. Another night you may wake with tears and feel something. Finally leave that you did not realize you still carried. On another, you may wake with a feeling of certainty you cannot explain, a knowing without words, a peace without explanation. This is how the unconscious speaks when it is finally heard. You become more whole. Not perfect, not invulnerable, whole, meaning you no longer abandon parts of yourself to survive. You no longer silence your truth to be loved. You no longer sacrifice your peace to carry what is not yours. You begin to trust that the universe is not against you. You begin to live without waiting for disaster. You begin to let the self that has always been within you finally step forward. The world may look the same, but you are not the same. And that difference is everything. You walk differently. You breathe differently. You move with grounded presence rather than anxious speed. You meet the day rather than hide from it. You speak with honesty rather than defense. You listen to inner signals instead of forcing yourself into shapes that do not fit. You belong to yourself again. And all of this begins in the smallest moment of the night. The moment you stop handing your unconscious fear and instead offer it peace. Tonight, when the world quiets and darkness settles around you, remember, transformation does not ask for strength. It asks for surrender. The soul does not open through force. It opens when you soften, when you speak truthfully to yourself, when you allow yourself to rest without holding the weight of the world. You are only ever one breath away from returning home, one moment away from remembering yourself, one sentence away from opening the door, and the night is waiting, ready to carry you into the place where you can finally breathe again. There comes a moment in every transformation when the change moves from inside to outside, when what was once only a quiet, internal shift becomes visible in the way you walk through the world. You begin to notice that the atmosphere around you responds differently. Life stops feeling like something happening to you and begins to feel like something unfolding with you. The resistance that once defined your days softens, replaced by a steady current of trust you cannot fully explain but deeply feel. In that new quiet strength, you realize how much power you had been giving away to fear, to memory, to expectation, to stories written long ago by pain. You see how much of your life was shaped not by reality, but by anticipation of wounds that never arrived. You see how much of your energy was spent trying to control what was never yours to control, and how exhausted you were from carrying battles that did not belong to you anymore. Then comes the realization that peace is not something you find. It is something you allow, something you remember, something that returns the moment. You stop gripping life with trembling hands and instead open your palms to receive it. Peace is not taught. It reveals itself when the noise finally falls quiet. The night becomes your teacher. The darkness becomes your guide. The silence becomes your ally. You begin to understand why Jung believed that the meeting with the unconscious is the most important event of a lifetime. Because only when you face yourself without distraction can you finally see who you truly are beneath everything you were told to be. You discover that nothing externally changes until something internally aligns. And once alignment begins, the world shapes itself naturally around it. You stop arguing with life. You stop fighting what already happened. You stop trying to rewrite the past through worry. Instead, you step into the present moment like a doorway, unarmed, aware, willing. The body feels lighter, the breath deeper, the heart less guarded. Where once there was constant anticipation, now there is trust. Where once there was noise, now there is clarity. Where once there was survival, now there is presence. You begin to inhabit yourself fully, without apology. People around you feel it. They may not understand what changed, but they sense the difference. They speak to you differently. They listen more closely. They soften in your presence because wholeness is contagious. Peace spreads. When you carry calm inside you, others find themselves breathing more easily around you. That is the quiet power of a healed interior world. Opportunities arise not through frantic chasing, but through alignment. You stop forcing paths that were never meant to open. You allow the right ones to appear, and they do. Not because the universe suddenly changed, but because you stopped blocking what was always meant to find you. You no longer walk blindly. You walk guided. Synchronicities become more frequent. Tiny signs appear like breadcrumbs left by the soul. A phrase overheard at the perfect moment. A dream that answers a question you never spoke aloud. A feeling that says, turn here, and you do. And something meaningful waits on the other side. Life begins to feel like conversation rather than accident. You start trusting that if something leaves, it was never yours. If something remains, it is aligned. If something returns, it has transformed. Nothing feels random anymore. Everything feels orchestrated by a deeper intelligence moving beneath the surface of daily life. The same intelligence that rebuilt your inner world while you slept. And this new way of moving through the world begins each night in silence, with a ritual made sacred by intention. Closing your eyes and offering the unconscious 7 holy words spoken with reverent quiet. I accept, I trust, I let go, I thank you. Good night. 7 words, 3 breaths, 1 surrender, a bridge between worlds. Acceptance dissolves resistance. Trust dissolves fear. Letting go dissolves attachment. Gratitude dissolves scarcity. And good night, spoken consciously, becomes a blessing, a declaration of peace to the soul. Over time, these words become more than a ritual. They become identity, a way of living. You begin to accept what comes and release what goes without gripping. You trust yourself, trust your path, trust the timing of your life. You stop forcing solutions and let clarity arrive naturally. You wake into gratitude rather than worry. You stop asking life to prove itself and instead allow life to reveal itself. This is how healing truly happens, not through effort, not through discipline, not through perfection, but through softness, through willingness, through surrender. The soul needs gentleness, not pressure. It opens like a flower in spring, not like a door kicked down. What once felt impossible now feels inevitable. What once terrified you now feels manageable. What once broke you now feels like a memory carried with grace instead of pain. You look back and realize that the mountain you thought would crush you became the mountain that shaped you. You understand that nothing was ever wasted. Every wound was a lesson. Every ending a beginning, every loss a clearing. The 7 words did not change the universe. They changed you. And because you changed, the universe met you differently. Now every night becomes a return home. Every morning becomes a rebirth. Every breath becomes a prayer. Every step becomes intention. And suddenly the life you used to chase now grows around you without effort. You become magnet rather than pursuer. You become witness rather than warrior. You become creator rather than survivor. The soul you once abandoned now stands at the center of your life, guiding you, calling you, breathing through you. And you realize that the greatest journey you will ever take is the journey inward, the journey back to yourself. And when the world becomes loud again, as it will, you no longer collapse. You return to the silence, return to the breath, return to the 7 words that rebuild you every night. I accept, I trust, I let go, I thank you. Good night. And the universe whispers back, as if answering through the quiet, rest now, you are safe. I hear you. Sleep becomes sanctuary, not escape. Dreams become guidance, not chaos. Morning becomes invitation, not burden. This is the quiet revolution. This is how a soul rises. This is how a life changes. Not through force, but through surrender. Not through noise, but through silence. Not through perfection, but through presence. And tonight, as darkness gathers around you and the world fades into stillness, you return home again. You feel the sheets against your skin, the calm settling through your body, the breath deepening in your chest. You close your eyes gently and speak the words that have carried you from fragmentation to wholeness. I accept, I trust, I let go, I thank you. Good night. 7 words, 7 seeds, 7 openings. In that moment, you are not hoping. You are not trying. You are not fighting. You are simply allowing. And that is enough. The night receives you. The unconscious opens its gates. And the soul steps forward to complete the work you began with a whisper. And in the morning, peace will rise with you. Good night.